everyone. Today we're going to learn about lab safety, and then we're going to kind of go over some lab equipment. That way, if you guys are doing a lab and something happens or an emergency situation arises, you know what to do. Also, if a lab instructions ask you to use a certain piece of equipment, you'll know what it looks like and what to use it for. So let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, when you come into lab, make sure you sit down at your desk and wait till you receive instructions. If there's anything on my lab tables, make sure you don't touch them. That includes equipment such as beakers, chemicals, and also any other materials you might see. For example, last year I had an incident where we were using rubber bands to hold down some fetal pigs, and so they had pig guts all over them. And then I had a couple kids in a different class shooting those rubber bands around the classroom, not knowing that they have been touched by pig guts. So if there's anything on the back table, make sure that you kind of just leave it be. Second thing is to follow instructions. So that means paying attention to all things that are written down on your piece of paper, and that means any verbal instructions I give you. Oftentimes, I do give verbal instructions like turn-in dates. I also might tell you to change things in a lab and do things differently than what the lab says. So whenever that happens, and you're one of those people just like me where things go in one ear and out the other, make sure you kind of jot those down as I tell you them so you don't forget. If you don't understand something in the directions or I've given you a verbal direction and you just aren't sure, make sure that you also ask questions. Okay. And last but not least on this slide, make sure that you read the entire lab procedure in terms of that step completely before going on to the next step. The third thing is to note the location of different safety equipment. Since this is in video format, I'm going to try to describe where it's located, but if you're unsure and you come back, ask me and I'll gladly point out the different safety equipment located throughout my room. The first one is the eye wash station. It's up near my desk. It is yellow. It's very obvious where it's located. It's out there. The way it works is you just take the caps off the eye wash station and then there's a little lever that you'll push backwards. You use this if you get anything in your eye, and unfortunately, if you do get something in your eye and you have to use this equipment, you're going to have to keep your eyes open for 20 minutes. Yes, 20 minutes. The next one is the safety shower. It's located right above the eye wash station, and this is if you have a big amount of chemicals spilled on your body, and this helps rinse off those chemicals as quickly as possible. For integrated science, there is no reason anybody should be using this, so please do not pull the handle for the safety shower unless I instruct you to do so. If you do it, this is your fair warning. I will send you to the office because that is a big job to clean up. The next is a fire blanket and a fire extinguisher. These are both located over by the door that you enter my classroom in. It's right along the edge of that lab station near Mr. Hammond's door in the phone caddy. A fire extinguisher and a fire blanket are used to put out a fire. The blanket needs to be used on a person. The extinguisher is used on an actual fire, like on a table or an equipment. Do not use the fire extinguisher on a person. The reason for this is a lot of fire extinguishers are made to make sure the oxygen can't reach the fire. Well, if you put that on a person, we need oxygen to breathe, and so it can cause breathing issues. The first aid kit, I have this, so if you need the first aid kit for any reason, if even just a Band-Aid, let me know and I can give you one. The office and nurse call button is actually located up near the whiteboard of the classroom. It is located by the band door with the skeleton, and you kind of have to put your arm back there. So that is one thing you can ask me when you guys get back where it's located. Exits, I have 3. I have one that exits into the band room near the whiteboard and the turn-in tray. I have the one that you usually enter class in from the hallway. And then I have the one that leads into Mr. Hammond's room. Goggle storage is located by the American flag where we take Pledge of Allegiance. There's a sign above it that says keep calm and goggles on to help you locate it, and it's a white storage unit. And the last but not least is going to be the emergency gas shutoff. This is located over by the eye wash station, and there's a big sign that says, "Notice, main gas shutoff." 4 is dressing safely. Now, I just want to preface this is since you guys are integrated science, we don't do too many with chemicals or any dangerous things. So this doesn't necessarily apply to you. This is going to apply more to chemistry, but I need to go over it nonetheless. Usually, if we're going to do a lab that requires us to wear safety or dress safely, the first thing and foremost is goggles. We also have gloves you can wear for working with any chemicals and aprons if you don't want anything on your clothes. Other proper lab equipment is going to be tying back long hair, dangly jewelry, or loose sleeves are rolled up, and that's to prevent your hair, clothing, and jewelry from either getting in a flame or getting into any chemicals. Other things with dress code includes long pants, and you want things that are closed-toed shoes like tennis shoes. So if you do spill something or you do drop something, it's going to hit your clothes before it actually hits your skin. Other things in lab to keep in mind is that a lab is for lab work and experiments. Don't ever eat or drink in lab, and that includes just even a simple water bottle. The reason for this is you want to keep things away from your eyes, mouth, and body. And the first thing food and water go to is your mouth. That goes hand in hand with the rule that says never touch, taste, or smell chemicals unless I ask you to do so. Sometimes I want you to smell something, and so what you'll do is you'll waft. That just means is you'll hold the chemical away from your face and gently brush or breeze over that air towards your nose. This leads us into, well, once you're done with the experiment, how do I clean up? Well, chemical disposal for you guys, most of it you can either put in the trash or down the drain. Check with me to make sure. There are a few things that can't go down the drain that I use in class. Those, I'm going to have a designated beaker that will say waste on it. Whatever you do, however, do not put anything that is chemical back in the original container because it could contaminate the original source. This is the last one on the slide, and I'm drawing special attention to this, is make sure that if you ever use something, it's labeled. Water is very clear liquid, but there are tons of chemicals that are also clear that look just like water that can be extremely deadly. For example, hydrochloric acid looks like water, but it actually corrodes and eats away at metal. So it's strong enough to break down metal. I don't think it's good to digest and ingest that. What happens if you spill something during lab or something breaks? Well, if you ever spill something, just ask me. Most of the time, your best bet is you can clean it up with a paper towel, but there still are those special chemicals that require me to put like baking soda on it. If there's also any glassware, let me know. I try to clean this up, that way I don't have to worry about you cutting yourself. And then I usually put it in something called a broken glass disposal. Honestly, it's just a wipe container that says sharp objects in it. If you do break something, never ever put it in the garbage because it has the potential to rip through that bag, and it can cut the janitor when she's emptying trash, or it can cut a garbage man if he's putting it into the back of his truck. I talk about this slide because this is honestly where most people get hurt during lab. They always forget that hot things are hot. We learn that when we're a child when they tell you don't touch the top of the stove, it'll burn you. Unfortunately, I have to go over this. My first year teaching, I had a student in class not believe me that the hot plate was hot, and he put his hand on it and he got a blister and we had to put ice on it. So let's go over this section. First and foremost, never leave anything that's hot unattended, and if you do leave it, make sure someone else has an eye on it and they know that it's hot. 2, if you use any equipment like a beaker or a graduated cylinder or even a hot plate, make sure that it's cooled down before you put it away. Never put hot glass in cool water and vice versa. So don't put cool water on hot glass. Hot water on cool glass. The reason for this is that temperature difference can cause it to shatter. Now, our glassware in class, like beakers, are made up of special glass called borosilicate glass, so this is less likely to happen, but we still want to minimize the potential for it to break. The next one is never heat a closed system. If you're unsure what a closed system is, a closed system is a container where it has a lid and the air is sealed inside of it. If you heat these, what happens is that air inside expands and it builds up pressure where it'll eventually explode. There was an incident that happened to a past student off campus or off school grounds where a glass bottle was thrown on a fire. It actually had a lid on it and it exploded and the glass shard went flying and cut her face and she had to have surgery. The next several bullet points: if you're going to heat anything, make sure it's not pointed towards you or a partner. That way, if it does splatter, it does not go on you or your partner, and definitely not in your face. If it's hot, make sure you use tongs or other equipment to transfer it without touching the hot glass. And last but not least, if there is a fire, fire extinguisher is for chemicals, fire blanket is for a person. Once you're all done, you need to clean up after yourself. So this means rinsing all your glassware and your lab equipment and then returning it the way you found it. So what I'm going to do is I sent home a safety contract to the students that were in class. If you are watching this video from home because you missed class, make sure you stop in and pick up that safety contract from me. There is a spot for you to sign and your parent to sign. On that safety contract, there's also 3 questions it's going to ask. It's going to ask, do you wear contact lenses? So that way I know if something does get in your eye that I need to remove those. It's also going to ask if you're colorblind because seeing colors is part of lab. And then last but not least, it's going to ask if you're allergic to anything. I do have a few students who are allergic to latex. I do use latex-free gloves, but that's still something nice to know so I know not to bring anything that's latex into class. So here, what I want you to try to do is I want you to try to pause this video and see what is wrong with this picture. What are some unsafe things that he's doing? Okay. Hopefully, if you watch this, you would notice that he does not have his goggles on. A couple other things you could have pointed out is if you saw some dripping back here, he has a wet plug-in. And if you plug in anything wet into an outlet, it can electrocute you. So make sure that whenever you have something wet that you're not putting it in the outlet. A couple other things is he has this lid off this container and it's at the edge of the table, so he has the potential to accidentally knock it off. There's also a very sharp object, it looks like a knife towards the end of the table that it has somebody can run into it. What about this picture? See what you can find. Here, there are several things going on. First thing, she does not have her hair tied back, and neither one of them are wearing goggles. Another thing is she's also not paying attention to what she's doing. She's almost knocking over this graduate cylinder over here, and it could have a chemical in it that could hurt you if it got on you. Last thing I'm going to point out is that here he's heating up a test tube and it's pointing directly at his partner. If that were to splatter, it would get on her. And here's your last picture. See if you can figure out what's wrong. Here, there are a couple things. One of the things that we have not mentioned yet is she's smelling directly into this chemical. Remember, if you're to smell anything, you want to make sure to waft it towards you. Another thing in this picture that we have not seen in the others is that there is eating and drinking in this lab, and you don't want to do that. And the last thing I'm going to point out is that here we have bunches of crumpled paper and the lab station's dirty. You want to try to keep as tidy of a lab station as possible. So that's what I have for lab safety. Let me know if you have any questions over lab safety, anything that I didn't cover that you were curious would happen, if what to do if it happened. Otherwise, email me and let me know. The last thing we have to go over is lab equipment. Lab equipment goes by special names, and sometimes when I say them in instructions, I need you to know what lab equipment is which. Here, this is a picture of a beaker. A beaker helps hold, mix, and helps you heat any solids or liquids. And we use this most often in lab. You're going to see beakers almost every time you do a lab. One thing not to use a beaker for is we usually don't use a beaker to measure any kind of accurate volume. We just use it to hold liquids. The next one is an Erlenmeyer flask. I use these occasionally in integrated science, mostly in chemistry though. This does the same thing as a beaker. It helps pour, heat, cool liquids, stir liquids, and these don't splatter as easily because the opening is not as wide. Here, this is the second most obvious equipment that you will have almost every lab. This is known as a graduated cylinder. People often get this mixed up with a beaker, but notice this one is a lot taller and narrower, and this one is only used to measure volume. Now, graduated cylinders have to be read a certain way in order to read it accurately. Typically, what you do is you will put water in a graduated cylinder. You put it on a level surface, whether that be a table or a desk. You need to squat down and look at it where it's eye level with you. And you're going to see a little bubble. So here you see this little bubble at the top. Notice that it curves. The bottom of that curve is called the meniscus. And that is where you're going to read the measurement. A couple other things that you might see in lab include a test tube rack, and test tube holder. Test tubes are used to heat chemicals or hold and mix them. A test tube rack holds test tubes, so you're able to keep them upright. And test tube holder allows you, so this is a test tube holder, carry a test tube in case it is hot because you put it in a flame. Other equipment is going to be things used for transferring or basically moving hot equipment or chemicals. So beaker tongs allow you to hold a hot beaker. So you can carry a hot beaker. A pipette is used to transfer a chemical from, like, let's say a bottle to a test tube. Forceps allow you to pick up small objects. Crucible tongs also allow you to pick up hot objects, just like beaker tongs. And then a scupula allows you to transfer chemicals such as a powder. More equipment, stirring rods. So here's a picture of a stirring rod. Right in its name, it's used to stir. Typically, they're just long things of glass. And the reason we use glass is because it doesn't get near as hot as quickly as if we were to use a metal stirrer. Next, you have a thermometer. A thermometer that we use in class measures temperature, and I want to point this out. It measures it in degrees Celsius. Next, we have a funnel. This helps filter things. We're going to use a funnel in one of your labs. I'm going to give you a plastic one, though, however, not glass. And then the last one we have up here is a mortar and pestle. So the bowl is the mortar, and this long thing is your pestle. It's used to crush, or I would say grind, solids into a powder. We also have what's called a wash bottle. This usually has distilled water in it, and we use it to clean out some glassware. It also allows us to add small amounts of water into like a graduate cylinder or to any kind of container. We also have brushes. Now, these are called test tube brushes, but they can be any size brushes. These can also be used to clean graduated cylinders, and that's all they do is clean. And now we're down to our last two slides. Well, how do we measure things and how do we heat things up? This one is for measuring mass. What happens is we have an electronic scale that will measure the mass of whatever chemical we're working with, but we never want to put something directly on the scale. So what we do is we use something called a weight boat or a weigh boat. This is a very thin, flimsy plastic bowl that we can put chemicals in and put them on top of the scale to figure out how much that chemical weighs without directly putting the chemical on it. And the last one we have is for heating chemicals. Heating chemicals, this little guy down here, he is called a striker. He creates a spark. So he creates a spark. Spark to light a flame. Where he gets the flame is from this guy right here, and he is called a Bunsen burner. What happens is gas comes out of the top here, and when you light that gas on fire, this creates a flame for you to heat up chemicals. And the last dude we have here is going to be, this guy is called a hot plate. He heats up chemicals as well. One thing I want to tell you about hot plates in our class is the hot plates in our class does not have a light to tell you that it's hot. So even though it may not be plugged in, it could still be hot and cooling down. So never touch the top of these without first kind of holding your hand above it to make sure there's no heat being put off. Because these do get extremely hot, and I have had kids burn themselves on it. And that's the end of the equipment that we'll be using in class. If for some reason you have any questions, make sure you check with me. If you're unsure what something is or you just need review, let me know that as well. And I hope you guys have a good day, and let me know if you need anything.